Maybe I'll get things started. So, Will, you seem to be coming down on in looking at funder platforms, it seemed like you were intimating that from your analysis, they seem more like competitors than, collaborators. And then Sabina, in your research, one of your points in talking was that one of the reasons for the platforms was to be able to publish a lot of things that weren't being published otherwise. But the data showed that, like 2/3 of the articles are research articles.
Yes.
So I just wondered, from everybody's point of view, sort of, or is there sort of any author behavior that you're seeing that points to how this is shaking out in terms of where people are deciding to publish and why?
Who do you want to go first?
Everybody.
I've got the mic, so I'll go first.
Yeah, but go ahead and start.
So if I take the funder platforms as an example to begin with, I think what we see typically is when the researchers are trying it out, they might first submit a protocol or a data note, something like that, to really get a sense of what the peer review process is like and what the speed is like. And then what we've seen is that after they've gone through that, then they've come back with a research article. And the research articles will be all types. It can be something fairly groundbreaking, but it can also be null findings, replication studies, and that's something that we really encourage them to publish, so that research article proportion would be a combination of all of those types of research articles. So what we see is that as we gain, trust, then they come back with more and more research articles.
So I think it's too early to tell, and on some level you can view that it is complementary because there are journals like Science that don't have this space to publish data articles or reports, but that doesn't mean in our other subscription journals we shouldn't be innovating and including broader research outputs. That's certainly something we should be doing. But I just want to make a point that there is, I think, a distinction between the rhetoric of stakeholders, of publishers and funders, and that is something wholly different and often completely detached from authors and researchers and their behavior. And one is in a political context, and the other one is going to be how do authors treat these publication platforms? Where does it fall into their workflow and their publication decisions? And it probably takes us a year or two to actually see how this ecosystem evolves.
Perhaps I could say something from UCL Press in terms of research monographs, which we publish, which are mainly in the arts and humanities, some social sciences, some science, but mainly arts and humanities. And I think there is something significant about author behavior, which I've noticed over the 3 years we've been in existence. So 3 years ago, when I established the press, I had consultation meetings with heads of department, with researchers, and with deans of faculty in my institution. And I said, I understand you've got some issues around your ability to publish in the current publishing model. Please tell me what I can do with an institutional open access press. What can I do to help you overcome some of those barriers which you say you're experiencing? 3 years ago, most of the responses were, we don't want to publish a research monograph in arts and humanities in open access because we don't understand what open access is, we don't like it, we'd much rather publish with a commercial publishing model, even though the number of sales from a commercial publishing activity on the whole are actually quite small. Well, 3 years on, they're not saying that now. Why aren't they saying that now? They're not saying that now because they see the download figures that these individual monographs are getting from UCL Press. And it's not just UCL Press. Any institutional open access publisher that's following our open access monograph model would probably have the same set of results. We have a publishing list with proposals that we're now taking proposals 2 years ahead of publishing because there are so many proposals coming in from our authors who want to publish with us. Why do they want to publish with us? Because of the download figures, because of the impact. Because in the REF, our research evaluation exercise, open access impact can be part of the environment statement that you submit as an institution, and you get extra credit, recognition, and extra funding if you make a very good case in that environment statement for the impact that open access has made. So all these things, the platform, the publishing model, and the political environment are all changing the culture and the way that authors behave. So what started 3 years ago as, I'll do this over my dead body, now means we have more than enough monographs to keep going for the next couple of years. And it's a nice problem to have because we have too many things that we need to publish rather than too few.
So I agree with Will, and when I tend to be critical of our current publishing, I actually mostly am critical of the researchers themselves, because it's the researchers who drive all this. They don't know they drive it, and that's the interesting thing. The number of times they tell me, it's like, well, I can't make that available because the publisher then won't, and I'm like, I'm sorry, first of all, most of that's not true. Like, I can't put my data out in a public repository because then the publisher or the editor or whatever is not going to let me. And I said that this attitude got in there is just very telling, right? But it's not anything, for those of you, who ride horses, it's often amazing to us how much they listen to us, considering how much stronger they are than we are. And we're always afraid one day they're going to figure that out, right? Because we're like, well, actually, they could beat us to a pulp if they wanted to. But so it seems to be this sort of psychological grip. And so really those of us who are trying to change all of this are now going after promotion and tenure and other types of things that said, where did these ideas start to come in? And why do they have such a grip on the way that we view publishing? I think again, in these sort of circles, Force 11 and others, this idea that one should be publishing everything, and a subset of those may end up in exclusive journals as a mark of recognition, but that everything is out there and inaccessible in some way is going to start to take hold. And that's why I think so many people are very excited about preprints. Everybody had to look at their own incentive structures, right? NIH had to say, well, you can put it in a preprint, but we're not going to let you refer to this in a grant, right? So again, a lot of these things were really imposed by the researchers themselves and their evaluation committees. And I think that takes a while to dislodge, but I think it's starting to dislodge.
Hi, I'm Nina Hoffman from ASH. I'm wondering if, as funders become publishers and have platforms, it is widely believed by authors that the impact factor, especially in Europe and Asia, is very important to the tenure and promotion of authors. So given that funders don't really have an impact factor, or will they, do you see a shift in the promotions of people in the European Union and Asia, and how will the impact factor be factored into funders that are publishers?
Okay, I'd like to start the answer to that. Okay, I can only talk about Europe. I can't talk about Asia or other parts of the world, I'm afraid, but I can talk about Europe. So I'll come back to LERU, the League of European Research Universities. 23 research-intensive universities in Europe. We have signed the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, which says that the journal impact factor cannot be used as a surrogate for the quality of an individual article. It says nothing, absolutely nothing, about individual articles, and you can't reduce quality to a numerical value. How is that taken forward in LERU? Well, in my institution, I steered through with, that's not true, our Vice Provost Education steered through a new academic promotions framework last year, and I contributed to that because I lead for open science in my institution, and we reward openness as a core criterion for promotion through the grades to the professorial grade. We do not recommend that journal impact factors are used in promotion or appraisal frameworks. And we're just about to go out to consultation with our new bibliometrics policy for the university It's taken me 2 years to get a working group of academic support staff and academics to agree the principles of the bibliometrics policy. But the bibliometrics policy repeats what we say in the academic promotions framework, that journal impact factors should not be used. It is not accepted that they're used as criteria for promotion, because they do not measure anything at the article level. So in Europe, there is, I'm not saying that all academic colleagues are signed up to the San Francisco Declaration, because there is a great deal of discussion about how you operationalize the declaration at an institutional level. But in Europe, there is a growing debate about how you take the San Francisco Declaration forward and operationalize that so that you're delivering open science practices in your institution. And promotion frameworks and bibliometric policies are one way that we're trying to do that.
So it's very encouraging to hear that from you, Paul, actually. I mean, so one of the reasons we have the model the way that we do, the F1000 research model, is to work against the impact factor. Now, personally, my dream is that impact factors will die in my lifetime. Now, I don't know if that will happen, but the way it skews what ultimately gets published, and it skews editors' decisions whether or not they like it, it skews journal goals whether or not they like it, it's very, very bad for science. So this is why with the F1000 research model, it being open and versioning and all of this, it's really about the article level, the researcher level, not the platform level. And that's why it was very important for us to talk to the funders and the institutions, because the feedback we get from researchers is, well, I love the idea, but if I'm going to get promoted, then my institution is going to be looking at the impact factor of the journals I'm publishing in. Or some of them are even told that they cannot submit to a journal of impact factor lower than X, So that was precisely why we had to take this to the funders and the institutions and say that, would you actually support the open publishing and support your researchers to publish all types of outputs, however small or null or confirmatory. If you would support that and also support the fact that we don't have an impact factor, we don't want an impact factor, we never will go for an impact factor, as last time I heard anyway, then if they're the ones telling the people that they're funding or hiring that we're not going to look at impact factors, then it will go away. I mean, that's where the incentive comes from. The other one is, okay, if we don't talk about impact factors, if we're talking about things like reputation. So a key thing is where I publish, I want to make sure that people will respect my work. They'll respect the vetting process or how it got in there. So obviously these are new platforms. As I mentioned, F1000 Research is just over 5 years old. But our argument is everything is open. You can see for yourselves. You don't have to take our word for it that we've tried to select the best referees for this. And actually we welcome readers' comments. We have sometimes readers coming in and commenting on the reviewer, and there have been a couple of cases where we've had, as a result, gone off and got further reviewers. So the idea is that if you can keep it completely open, not focus on the impact factor, focus on the article at its own level, and come up with better ways of measuring the impact of the article, whether it's things like downloads, views, or Mendeley saves, or what have you. We also have F1000 Prime, which is a recommendation service, and what that does, it picks some of the top articles in its field and will recommend that to fellow researchers, which is another type of metric, So this is really where things are moving, and which I think will help us steer away from, the impact factor billboard.
Mm-hmm. I know there's another question, so I'll just have one quick comment. I've often reminisced with my older colleagues where I said, I don't even remember when exactly this started to come in, because when I started in research in the 80s and 90s, we never talked about any of this. And we understood that there were journals that represented our field, and that if you could get one in, you could get an article into it, that was a good measure that this was considered novel or particularly complete. But when we use the word high impact, we just use that to mean things that we knew in our field published high quality articles, and we didn't really care that there was a number associated with it. So I don't know whether it's the internet that now lets you look up numbers, or the broadening out of biomedical science, or what the heck it is, but I do remember a time when we never discussed any of that in our promotion and tenure decisions.
So, Brooks Antonigio. Marianne, I agree with a lot of what you said, but I'd like to push back from a couple examples that I know on a couple areas, particularly regarding the text mining via a central government repository. So, we've actually worked with people in our community in geosciences. So if you want to understand the sedimentation history of the Earth over 4 billion years, you need to mine basically all of the geologic literature to look at time-space micro measurements, same sort of thing. So we've been happy to work with our researchers on enabling that, and the logical place to enable that was at the institutional library repositories. And in fact, when I approached Wiley, they said, oh, we'll give them not just the HU content, but all of Wiley content, so for this research. So my experience has been a little bit different in terms of that, and I appreciate the value of a central government repository. I'll just remind everyone that we worked with our community in 2017 to rescue climate data from US government repositories, because the change in government led to a situation where the new government was not caring for that science. I'm being as polite as I can. So having, it seems, there are various ways of doing that, and I think the community is, there's an advantage to a distributed system as well, and having that system not connected with a government, from our experience. So just a couple thoughts.
No, so there's no disagreement there. I mean, I think that there's always an argument about distributed versus centralized, and I view our institutions should be the places that are giving us access to this, and that the agreements they put together with the publishers should allow that. And whether it's institution by institution, to me, this is where it has to go. And I really don't care how I get access to it, as long as it doesn't take me months and months and months and months of negotiation to try to get it. And then the next instance, I got to do it over again, and I can't invite my colleague in to help me, right? So those are the trade-offs, I think.
Perhaps I could just say something very quickly about text and data mining. Current issues in Europe about text and data mining. So the European Commission in Brussels is being lobbied, and has been lobbied for about 8 years now, by researchers and by libraries, people like me, for a mandatory exception in European copyright laws to allow text and data mining by anyone who has legal access to the content. Because many publisher licenses don't allow text and data mining in Europe at the moment. In the UK, our framework does, but only for academic purposes. That's not very open science, because you're ignoring citizen science, you're ignoring researchers who are not affiliated with academic institutions. And our contention, those of us who are supporters of open science, believe that these barriers have got to be broken down. And that another way you operationalize open science type activity is by looking at your legal and licensing frameworks and making them compatible with open science approaches, which allow text and data. We're not asking for access to content we have no legal access to. What we are saying is that it should be mandatory and not overridable by a contract or automatic prevention, digital prevention measures to allow text and data mining by anyone who has legal access to the content. It's taken us 8 years through the discussions in Brussels with the Commission to try and get agreement between all the stakeholders. We still don't have agreement, because different parties want different things. Some people like me want to be very open, others want to be more restrictive. So there isn't agreement. But unless we can push back on licensing and copyright restraints, we're not going to be able to deliver open science approaches. And I'd be really interested to hear how that works out in North America, what your challenges are about getting to that position where everyone can text and data mine if they want to, regardless of what institution they're attached to.
got a question from the online audience as well?
Excellent.
All right, it's from Duke University Press. For any or all of the panelists, has the international attention on data security and associated efforts and initiatives to prevent mishandling of data, personal or otherwise, such as GDPR, prompted any rethinking of workflows, platform design, screening protocols, e.g. F1000 searching online for conflicts of interest, who's married to whom, ?
Can I? Well, I'll start. So, I mean, in terms of the who's married to whom, that's not something we're publishing. That's something that we're just searching for. If sometimes you have people put their photos up together, it's rare. I just put that in the middle to wake people up. You know, it always gets a laugh when I mention that. So that's I was sort of joking, but I was serious. Basically, we would look up a potential reviewer's name. What do I mean by that? Nothing special. Pop their name into Google. And we're just looking at things like what kind of activities do they have? Do they have a homepage that lists this as their research interest? And sometimes you get some other kind of news about them that's out there in the media. Regarding data security, I'll kind of focus that on the data sets that are associated with the research articles. So any of the data that's being shared has to be shared in a public open repository. The authors have to choose either a CC0 or CC BY license. And one of the things that we're checking for, I mean, the editorial team, is whether there's any sensitive information in there. So even though we ask authors not to include sensitive information, sometimes they do. So we do take that step, and there have been cases where we've advised them to take something down that they've put up on another repository. But other than that, yeah, I mean, data security is an ongoing concern for everyone, and we're all learning as we go as well, but I guess we do our best to keep it secure. Who wants to go next?
Hi. Just thinking about rigorous peer review and that being crucial for article quality, journal quality, I guess specifically for F1000, but welcome all comments. Is there a danger to putting up articles that haven't completely gone through this peer review process and seeing the various stages, also considering that it may not be subject experts who are assigning these peer reviewers?
That's a good question. I always get that question. So in terms of the stringency of the peer review, so the way that the experts are identified, so in the first instance we ask the authors to suggest them, and then we also look at, do they cover all aspects of the paper as far as we can tell. We also ask the reviewers to declare their speciality and also to declare. So in the report we have a free form where they can give their comments, but then there's some mandatory questions in the hope that we can prompt them to think if they can cover all aspects of the article. So there are specific questions, mandatory, that they have to answer that get published alongside the report. Part of that is, did you look at the stats, for example? Has the data been made available? Are the methods appropriate for this study? So we're prompting them to actually think about those questions specifically, and then if the reviewer comes back and actually says, no, I haven't been able to look at the stats, then we can go off and find a particular statistical reviewer. We do have an advisory board as well, so that they would be subject experts, active researchers in the field who agree to advise us on particular articles. So if there are problems, we can actually go to them and say, can you have a look at this particular paper, either to review it or to advise on if there's an impasse between the author and the reviewer. But that's in terms of the danger of having it online before it's been reviewed. I guess it's the same arguments that are put forward for preprints. The idea is that if it's a scientific piece of information, it's a scholarly piece of work and it's out there and it doesn't contain anything sensitive. Now, I quite like, yes, I think Jorg is still in the room from Plus One, hi. So he pointed out something yesterday I quite liked, which is we still would actually focus on how much information is too much information. So I think you mentioned something about identifying the location of endangered species or that kind of thing. So we'd still be looking for those kind of things, and you don't need to necessarily be an absolute subject expert for that. You need to have scientific knowledge and to see that actually this particular piece of research could be sensitive, and we need to be aware of that and careful of that. So that's sort of the editorial checks that we do. But so far we haven't had any, I would say, any particular problems in terms of having it out there. If an article doesn't pass peer review, everyone can see it, and they can see why.
So unfortunately, we're out of time. But thank you all for coming, and a big round of applause for our speakers.